So PvP has been brought up a number of times, and in an MMO, I think when you're designing an MMO, this is just based on trying them over the years. You have to decide on the front end if you're going to be PvE based or PvP based. There's a number of ways to do both those things. Everything from large scale content where it's really open sandbox, something like EVE Online, to explicitly PvP based when you move into other genres where like StarCraft 2 was clearly designed with that in mind, and anything PvE it offers feels like something that has responded to that system and not the other way around. And I think in any game you have to decide very quickly, will players be against each other, and what is that role? And when we talk about Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft, PvE came first. PvE has always been the priority. And so PvP has been this bolted on section, and so they've developed a community that has sought that out. But the strength of that community is what drives that content, in my opinion, not necessarily dev intent. I don't know how to say that exactly the way I mean it, but it can really vary. And without community engagement, that whole system falls apart. It really is something that inherently can't be soloed. It inherently is not fun if only a handful of people join in. It's the spectacle of it all. So it's worth doing if other people do it. If other people don't, you stop doing it. And then if it stops getting done, it's not worth doing. So you stop doing it, and it spirals downward until it dies as content. The games both offer it. They offer it in a variety of ways. Let's kind of like gear. Let's start off with World of Warcraft because it's the more complex system, and I will probably forget things because PvP is not the number one thing I seek in both these games. They do both have invitationals at the top level. They both do have seasonal aspects to this. There are communities that support them. I'm just not a member of those, and when I want to scratch the PvP itch, like to play in games, these just aren't the two games that I happen to do that in. I played PvP back in WoW, like way back in the day, back in vanilla and in TBC, and like early arena days, and a little bit into Wrath. Like I enjoyed I've enjoyed World PvP across some expansions, and then just the longer I've been in that game, the more it's fallen off. I've had brief stints where I've really engaged in PvE in Final Fantasy, in Feast, and in like the larger group stuff, but it's never been something that's been my primary mode. It's always been, hey, we should get a group together and do this, but like I'm gonna make a raid, or I'm gonna have this objective in game. Like it's always been secondary for me, so I'm not the perfect person to speak on this. But World of Warcraft has basically kind of two halves to this. You have ranked and unranked, and that's really where it starts. Like, so the casuals have an unranked access to things. They have a variety of basically battlegrounds we engage in. There is arena, that's the more competitive side of it, but on the casual end, you're mostly going to be focused on knocking out like your unranked battlegrounds for the week to maybe pick up some gear on a class that is under geared heavily. It drops a currency called honor. This content ranges from I think 10 man is the smallest when you look at like Warsong Gulch and Arathi Basin, I want to say, are like 10 mans. I really know this very, very poorly, so like I want to kind of have this as an entry point to show you like a glimpse of how big it is. But like if you have any interest in any of this, immediately go look everything I've just said up. And from there it can step up. So like our very first big ones was like Alterac Valley, which is played very differently today than it was played back in the day. We also had big world PvP zones. By the time we got into Wrath of the Lich King, we had big timed events that were up every so often, and you wanted to kind of be there for those. Wintergrasp, and then when your faction controlled Wintergrasp, there was actually a raid that was available. Like, so it was a whole thing, and there's been a number of things like that, and those have been brought into a playlist, and so you can go back and play Wintergrasp as a battleground of sorts. And so it can scale to the point where like teams have tanks and all this stuff that you get in, and there's towers and turrets, and it can scale. And so if you're just jumping in casually to do a little bit of unranked, it's an enormous system that is mostly just spectacle, and it's it's fun, and there's going to be people who are taking it seriously in there, and they're going to be really mad that some casuals don't know what they're doing. And it is just a grab bag of what everybody's intentions are and expectations are. And so you'll go in one time and just rock the other faction, and you'll go in later and just get rocked. It's just chaos. And then you move into ranked. So you start to talk about pre-made, you start to talk about having a rating. The currency behind that is conquest. And so based on your rating, like, you can kind of work your way up through that. There is an arena invitational that happens at BlizzCon, I think is where that happens. And so you get into a more competitive scene. Keep in mind that on the PvE side of things, the Race for World First is more community driven, but there is an M+ invitational that's that small man content that's happening kind of alongside arena. In my mind, those two things kind of take parallel paths. I don't know if the timing on the events is always lined up, but like in my mind, those are opposite sides of the same coin charging forward, right? You got you got small groups of set people that are incredibly good at this content that are going to compete in a bracket of sorts. And it's going to be an esport, right? We're going to make it a thing. We're going to make it fun to watch. And so like whether you personally engage at that level or not, it's something for the community, right? So you're glad that rated PvP exists, because watching the invitational, even if you just catch a few rounds, right, is, it's still really fun, and I'm glad it exists. It's just not something that I engage in. That's all there. It's definitely big enough that if you want to play a PvE game, if you want to level up and have gear and all that, and dive into stuff with friends, and then PvP is your thing, and PvE is your friend's thing, World of Warcraft may be that game that satisfies both groups. The top PvPers have an incredibly deep knowledge of a system that may or may not make them good at raiding. It may or may not make them good at Mythic Plus. It is not uncommon for top Mythic Plusers to be top PvPers, but it is also not uncommon for them to exclusively focus on the PvE side of things or the PvP side of things. It is not uncommon for a top PvP player to be present in a raid group that is in the top, let's say, 100 guilds, but it is also not uncommon for them to not do that, and they're in a guild that takes it, let's say, moderately more casual compared to like people that are going for world first. There is advantages early on in expansion to having that top gear from both. There are advantages to having that level of knowledge of your class and of the other class designs, but it's not required. Like good mechanical skill, good team play, and being willing to play specs that have a slight edge in the current balance, or just overcoming that through sheer brilliant play. It is its own competitive scene, and it is immensely deep. There are tons of achievements, there are tons of modes, and there is a surprisingly large number of people engaging in it for a game that predominantly presents itself as PvE with PvP content inside of it. That's my feelings towards this. This is probably by far the least informed post I've put on this channel, and probably by far the one that's going to most show a bias towards the way I consume this game, because like I don't even know enough about this system to be truly empathetic, but people were asking about it, and so I just want to give you enough to like get your feet wet, and then I'm telling you there are brilliant creators that cover this, and go engage them. So if any of this interests you, or if any of this that doesn't sound right, go look this up. On the Final Fantasy side of things, because if you go look up experts, they may not be totally aware of what's going on in the other game. The Final Fantasy side of things, most in the Western audience, because my understanding is like JP servers always do things differently, and EU servers may even do these things differently, but in North America, it's popular at the beginning of a season, and then it falls off. So if you're going to engage in it at the beginning of the season, or there are like PvP discords and things like that where people organize times they're all going to get on, so the queues are shorter, but otherwise expect like 40-minute queues. It's convoluted. You get into these modes where the teams are huge, and it can be like 3 teams fighting, and like it can be really fun, but it's hard to get enough rounds in a night that it's what you want to focus on. And because when you're queued for that, you can't queue for anything else, it's not like you can go run a dungeon as a pre-made and then get sucked into PvP. There's so many limitations, so you're just kind of stuck waiting around. And so what that ends up doing is making those people go, well, I don't want to wait for a 40-minute queue, so then the queue only gets longer because we're not all waiting. They do have something called Feast, and there is an invitational tied to that, and there are top PvPers, but it suffers from an even worse set of symptoms than like the Unreal, where we talked about like the top in my world first video. You talk about like the lack of content that Final Fantasy XIV has at that level compared to WoW, and how it's hard to foster an event and a bunch of guilds that are full-time at this and taking this seriously. And it's hard to foster the infrastructure that allows the world first race and everything surrounding it to be what it is in WoW. It's hard to get that in 14 when you only have 2 ultimates per expansion, and the Savage fights, there's only so many of them. It's just, there just isn't enough of it to get the level of like player interest and player investment, and honestly outside investment, because the number of eyeballs on it, it's not as many eyeballs, and it's not for as long of a time. When you approach a sponsor and you say, I'm gonna have an event with 50 to 150,000 people watching it for guaranteed a minimum of 1 week straight, getting sponsorships is an opportunity, and like an individual guild can get sponsorships, not just the whole event. Over here it's like, might only take them a couple days. We're going to get between 5 and 50,000 people watching at any given time. And there have been times around Ultimate where it's higher, but it's so hard to predict because we don't have the track record of, you know, there's going to be 10 bosses every tier for the entire length of the expansion. And so it's just harder. And PvP on 14 suffers from that exact same set of things. There are experts in this. It is a thing you can engage in, but if you're coming to 14 and you're interested in PvP, that's fine. Get some friends together, try it. They have custom matches going in there. We've had a ton of fun doing like community-driven events. We've had a blast doing it, but and there's some interesting things about the systems and when you engage with them that I'll talk about, like how they've been done over the years, because I'm not totally aware of everything that's going to be going on with Shadowlands. So I'm just going to talk about kind of some differences in the way community has like fostered things. But 14 has just struggled to make it an established and beefed up thing, and they continue to add modes to try to draw people in, but what it ends up doing is fracturing that community even more long term. It draws short term interest, and then now there's just even more like, I was really wanting to do Shatter, and you're like, oh no, I hate Shatter, and like it just spreads it even further. And I don't know how they do it. I don't think incentives always work out exactly right, and I don't think a lack of incentives always works out right. I don't know what the fix is, and I don't know that it's the priority where 14 is. I think people would rather more voice acting in narrative cutscenes than they would invested time into PvP content as a community as a whole, and so they just have to decide, like, who are we aiming to satisfy here? Now, how the community engages with these is very different. So, like, I've loosely summed up the content, and, like, I'm just telling you, like, this is something that I've touched in both, and I've spent hours and hours doing it. And like, the whole time I don't entirely know what's going on, and I'm just having fun with friends. That's all it is for me. I enjoy, as a druid, like the battlegrounds have always historically, no matter the expansion, been fun for me. Druids, I've just always found druids really fun in PvP. We have a lot of like movement advantages, and so like being a flag carrier is really good, and having a lot of hots and instant heals is really good, and having a bear form is really good, and like there's so many things where like at least one of my specs is good in like every mode. Oh, and I have stealth, and I have like, I just, being a hybrid class, I've always found it really fun to be in PvP. It doesn't always mean I'm the top class, but it is a ton of fun. They are kind of balanced a little bit differently. So 14 is going to scale everybody to like a set item level, and they're going to do that because they want to let you in at level 30, and then you gain experience from there, and everybody's in one bracket because they're trying to just get as many people in as possible. So when you're in just like group, let's say this, like in the battleground type mode, when you're in these big, what is it, like 24v24v24, is that right? It's a lot. So they're crazy people mode, 72 people. I don't know. It's a lot. And so like when you're in just these chaotic modes, you have like, you can change classes at any time. So imagine you could change specs and all that. When you're in Feast, you can't, and there's set party comps. But when you're in the battleground, like the number of healers on a team can be ever shifting, and everybody just has to have above 30, and you're getting experience, and like and you have a simplified set of skills on the bar, and so like every class is simplified down to like almost like a Guild Wars 1, like a 10 ability type thing, and you might press an ability and it'll combo for you, so you just press 1 1 1 1, And so like the whole thing has been dumbed down to make it more attainable. And so it feels starkly different than PvE content. So when you get into matches, like I encourage you guys to try it at least once if you're Final Fantasy players that have never done it. It's your class feels totally different. On the WoW side of things, historically, I don't know how this works with since the leveling change. They had like level bands, and then you queued with that level band, and then over the years they've treated twinks differently. In my mind, they should be in their own bracket, right? And what that means is somebody that's frozen experience, so they'll lock in at like level 39 to be the best they can be in the like 30 to 39 bracket. And they'll do that because they find 39 a particularly fun set of skills to have for their class, and it's easier to kit out and max out the gear and leave it there forever than stay on top of it at max level content. And like they just prefer it. It's like a whole nother game mode. And they'll go out and they'll farm up all the best gear for that character and get that gear into the absolute best in slot. Now, when if they're ever all grouped in with everybody, they get to just run around just one-shotting people who are like, oh, I'm just leveling and I'll take a break and hop into this content. It'll be really fun. Oh, this guy's just going to kill me in like 2 hits. Awesome. That's lame. And so those people just run around poning people. I don't think that's particularly engaging. So like they've handled twinks differently over the years. And like how you balance for that, I found it's just easier to just wait till cap and go in. Just to avoid that mess altogether. That's my personal take on that, but like WoW has always been more, you have your full class, your full set of skills, and then over the years they've done various things with gearing where we've had like an additional stat called resilience, and they've changed it. It shifts, but basically it's like, okay, am I good in PvE gear in there or am I not? And the balance of that has just shifted over the years. What classes, what specs are viable has shifted over the years. There is a whole separate meta. And so one of the reasons I never get into WoW PvP, the reason I don't get into 14 and the reason I don't get into WoW are two different things. The reason I don't get into 14 is it is casual enough that I feel I could have fun in there right from the get-go, but the wait times are too long. And that's what stops me. In the WoW side of things, it is so deep of a system and it is so much going on and it is this whole other thing that you could play this game just for the PvP. Just like in 14, there are people who just play it for crafters. And people are like, wow, that's really meant to be like a subsystem. How do you make that like your entire gameplay? People do it and they have a blast. There are WoW PvPers that's all they do. They log in and they just PvP. That's their focus. That's their thing. And anything they do outside of that is to take a break from or to augment their PvP experience. And when they're doing these like PvP experiences, like it is so deep and a meta forms and there's so many people engaging in it. And when you jump into a battleground, like it balances for the number of healers and stuff. So it's always, the system is always doing things to get you into games faster, and you can learn a lot. Running in pre-mades makes it totally different. We saw that in WoW Classic a lot. Like PvP is very different in Classic than it was way back in Vanilla because people have optimized this so heavily. It's a totally different animal now. And so I think that in general, like the reason I don't engage in PvP is because it's literally like run in, you die some, you get some kills, you have a lot of fun, or like go learn all this stuff. And I find so little ways to like just be like slightly better than everybody else. You don't. Like the moment you try to engage in this system, you're aware that there are experts in here and there are people that know so much. And so it's just overwhelming how optimal you can play each game mode, how optimal you can play your class, how it's just a whole nother thing. Understanding what you should be prioritizing on the gearing, understanding how you should be working together with other classes, understanding each of the accepted strategies that there might be and when to adjust and why you shouldn't be fighting in the middle and all of these things. It's so much. So I put together this post because like compared to somebody that's never played the other game, yeah, I guess I can touch on it. But compared to like everything else I've talked about on this channel, it is something that I just barely glanced the surface of. And I'm aware that 14's is lacking compared to other communities. And I'm aware that WoW's has a level of depth that has allowed it to spin into this whole thing that doesn't even feel like Blizzard fully controls it. It kind of feels like Race for World First in that like so much about it is the community. and then like the devs will make a choice and it'll affect the community, and the community will like feel offended that they built something and then the devs were accidentally able to impact it, and they're like, why can't you get this right? And it's like, it just feels like something, they put a set of rules in place and then the community has taken that set of rules and turned it into something very different. It's its own moving thing, and that's just the nature of players interacting with other players. There's so much less like NPC driven and scripted control, so it just becomes its own thing. But I think if PvP is your sole focus, I would pick WoW over 14 by far, but like I would also go look at other games, because I wouldn't immediately assume that WoW is the best. It might be the best one. I don't know. I'm not the expert on how it works in all games, but like I would go look at other games. Like I always hear good things about Guild Wars 2, and like right now people say it's kind of, you know, it's kind of on a lull, but my understanding is there's like a chapter 3 coming this year. So does that bring it back? Like I don't know. So like I would go out and seek out forums, and I would go out, and if that's a big part of the experience for you, the reason it was a big part of experience for me and it fell off is it exactly tracks with how long my brothers played the game with me. My brothers are huge into PvP in games, and so when they're both playing a game, I get into PvP. But like left to my own devices, I don't really seek it out. I don't find it fun solo in most games. I'll go queue solo in Halo. I'll go queue solo in Call of Duty. Outside of shooters, like I really don't queue solo. Even in Destiny, when you start to put abilities in and things like that that just drastically change the game, I'd just really rather be sharing the experience with a friend. That way, if I'm losing, at least I'm having a good time with hanging out with friends. I just would really prefer to play with friends. So this post is probably more revealing about how I engage with PvP in games than actually helping you understand the differences between the two. But I wanted to share it because I've seen it brought up a couple times, and like just know that I would rather tell a new player or a person considering 14 for the first time that there is no PvP, and them say you're wrong and I'm surprised and I'm delighted. I would rather set the expectation low, and then if they find out they like it, it's there, than try to sell it as something and then they get here and they hit that 40-minute queue time or whatever, and they don't end up liking the way that they've handled it with like squishing the jobs down and shrinking the number of abilities, and they're like, wow, this doesn't feel good, and then be mad that like I said, oh well, wherever you're coming from, it'll have something just as good. I don't know that. Within WoW, I would say it's at least a system big enough that you've got a long run of content to try everything for the first time. And then if at the end of that you don't like it, you at least got dozens and dozens of hours out of it. So there's a lot there. That way, like even if you don't like it at the end, you've got to get a lot of fun out of it. So like at the very least, it's a lot of content. And at the most, it's a lot of content that you're going to want more and more of, and has a really long amount of replayability for you. I cannot promise that either of these games will be the best experience you've ever had. But on sheer quantity of content, I think that WoW is the more likely one for you. And if PvP, just to leave this on one final note, if PvP is the sole reason you play MMOs, to be in PvP, I would strongly look at what's out there from that note, because that's not what the review scores are going to reflect. That's not what the number of views on Twitch or YouTube are typically always going to reflect. PvP is not the top content in most MMORPGs. So like, you know, a score of a 9 and a score of a 7 on like Metacritic, the 7 might be like, yeah, but the PvP is really good. And the 9 might be like, it's good at everything but PvP. But like those other things are more important to what we're scoring MMOs on. So just like really go out there and research that community in particular, and research specifically what it is you're looking for with a group of friends or alone, and make sure the game has it before you hop in, because you know it's absolutely possible to run a successful MMORPG without PvP altogether, but to have good PvP is an incredible gift to a community, and I wish more games had it, even though it's not necessarily something I'm going to engage in. Just like Ultimates and Mythics, I think it's really important to community building. I just don't know that it's important to my particular set of gameplay. But this was just me talking about gaming, kinda, and I owe you guys some voiceover stuff for Realm Reborn, and I'm going to go get back to working on that. So, take care.